Hello and welcome, I am the Anonymous Weeb. And today we are going to be doing something very exciting indeed. We are going to do a SWOT analysis on Tight Kubo's apparently not so limited run series Burn the Witch. What is a SWOT analysis, I hear you say? Well my friend, a SWOT analysis is when someone looks at something and considers that thing's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Strengths are things that it does well, weaknesses are things it does not so well, opportunities are good things it could do in the future, and threats are things which would get in the way of those opportunities. I have taken the time to do this and have found 5 things for each of these parts of the analysis which I will discuss in this video. This is going to be a long video as I am going to go into some detail on each of my points, so feel free to get yourself a drink, a snack and make yourself comfortable. If you are looking for a specific section of the video, there will be timestamps in the description to the start of each section. Now without further ado, let us begin. Burn the Witch has several strengths which make it worth reading. And the one I wish to focus on first is the art style and character design. One of the things Kubo has always been good at is making his characters stand out and having their appearance tell you something about their character. Noelle wears a neat and proper uniform, showing her more serious demeanor when compared with her partner Ninny, who wears a bit more outgoing outfit, lacking the blazer and replacing the skirt with a pair of black shorts along with boots shows her lack of regard for authority and her more openness to complain about the situation. Both characters are drawn in such a way to appear realistic with their own universe, but also to make them stand out when compared to the background characters. Noelle has her hair distinctive hairpiece and Ninny has her rather distinctive hair which no one else in the series has shown as of this moment. The consistency between the two is their mantle and pipes. This subtle but important detail helps to identify the two characters as part of the Piper's unit of Wingbind, which is something which was sorely lacking in Bleach, as it was impossible at a glance to tell which division any Soul Reaper came from provided they were not a captain or vice captain. By providing this combined mix of mantle and pipe, Kubo has made it so without even needing to tell us anything about any character he introduces. If they are wearing a mantle and pipe, then they are part of the Pipers. Moving away from the two main female leads and towards the members of Wingbind Top of the Horns, the apparent supreme leaders of Wingbind itself, we see that once again Kubo is giving characters distinctive appearances which have the potential of telling us something about their characters. Starting with Bruno Bagneef, his appearance certainly gives off the look of someone who is not a fan of the quiet and slow approach to matters. The thing which makes Bruno stand out in terms of design for me is the mask that he wears, having filters on either side of the cheeks and designed to look like a skeleton, and the fact that he carries with him several what appear to be spray cans on his back under his jacket. The mask could easily be a nod to Kubo, to the current situation of the world, but it could also be another distinctive mark of the Inks, as could the spray cans. Considering that members of the Pipers use pipes as a means of casting their spells, it isn't hard to think that the Inks would use spray cans or some other instrument of spreading ink or paint over a surface to cast their spells. The mask might serve the purpose of protecting their lungs from breathing in the particulates from the spray, as he only put the mask on once he began to fight seriously. As whatever is in those cans is unlikely to be only regular paint, this could be another display of the unique uniform of the different units of Wingbind. Moving on a bit faster, as we have not had the chance to learn about the distinctive characters of the other members of Top of the Horns. Roy B. Dipper has a profoundly serious and clean look to him, a man of business and does not like to mince words. Considering that in the meeting he only spoke up to correct Bruno's mistake about the time since the last Dark Dragon managed to get into reverse London, we can assume he is the sort that believes the accuracy of facts is more important than the generalization. Kuntnayamaliv's fanciful design catches the attention and seems the most out of place when compared to the others. As while their designs have their own quirks, they still seem somewhat like work attire, while her design is more fanciful and plays perhaps into the more fairy tale inspired part of the story. It could also be that as the head of what might be the religious sect of Wingbind, this is a traditional holy garment of some kind. Going off the little we saw of her, she's quiet and reserved, not speaking during the meeting with the other leaders of Wingbind but instead just smiling the entire way through. This is in contrast with her outwardly sexual appearance, but we will have to wait until we get more of her character down the line. Trombone Takinen is the leaders of the pipers, and as such he wears the mantle keeping with the consistent design, but he really plays into the whole fantasy role the series seems to be going with, appearing like an elderly dwarf or gnome, and the fact he is wearing a tin hat makes me think that it's going to turn out to be his pipe or something. His appearance gives off that of a kindly old man, which, given that his sect of Wingbind oversees the preservation of dragon species, this suits his design well from what we know of him. Sullivan Squire, the leader of Sabres, wears a cool and clean military uniform. From what we have seen of her character, she seems to value professionalism and manners, as she wasn't happy when Billy Banks Jr. was demoted from Sabres and didn't bid her farewell. Given her appearance, she is the sort of person who will always act on the side of the law and believes that following the rules is of great importance. It can also be assumed that she runs her unit of Wingbind like a military when compared to the Piper's more laid-back approach to management. Harry Shake, the leader of Billionaire's design, is one that mirrors his laid-back attitude and gives off the appearance of a rich kid who does not take things seriously because they have wealth. Given his lack of screen time, we can't say if this suits his personality, but from his actions of chewing gum throughout the meeting with the other leaders it can be assumed he doesn't think much of the meeting importance. He wears a mantle, but it is different colored and patterned when compared to the one of the Pipers. Considering that money is often depicted as green, this could be a sign of the Billionaire's unit. Wolfgang/Ho, the head of Gallows' design, gives away that he is an elderly gentleman and has a profoundly serious demeanor. Wearing a smart purple suit along with his black Glen plaid mantle along with his violet-tinted glasses along with his serious expression give the impression of a high-class crime boss, someone who isn't afraid of doing the dirty work and won't take insubordination lightly. Given how he easily and without remorse declared the execution of Balgo without considering the alternatives speaks to his merciless attitude, which is reflected in his sharp, narrow gaze. The final humanoid character design I would like to discuss before moving on to the designs of the dragons and the world is Billy Banks Jr. His design is one that is supposed to be unassuming, laid back in a way that is different from Harry's, more like he does not care about his outward appearance compared to not being bothered by it. This look is supposed to disguise the fact that he is apparently a rather powerful individual capable of taking down a dragon that was giving Bruno, Noel and Ninny trouble from a considerable distance, unnoticed. A clear display of a design contrasting with a character's personality or ability for the sake of deceiving both the reading and the characters in the series. Moving on to the designs of the dragons, which are both inventive and creative. Some of these dragons take on features of everyday items such as plant pots, while others have aspects of regular animals such as the budbuck, while also retaining fantastical elements to them. As of this moment there are no two dragons which are the same, even those of the same kind are distinct from one another in some way. Each of the dragons have bodies which influences how they are used by the people in the setting, and the dark dragons are suitable, twisted and terrifying as to make them distinct from the regular dragons that they once were. As for Cinderella, the dragon is suitable majestic for a creature of legend, and the manner in which its form changes in the moonlight from one form to the other without making it appear like a completely unrelated creature speaks well to the consistency of its design, which we can hopefully see in the other Marchen if they possess alternative forms. The design also speaks to the fairy tale which the dragon is named after, showing how we might expect Kubo to interpret these famous stories for the other dragons which are to come. Moving into the world design, the fact that this story is probably mainly going to take place in reverse London and the fact it is based of regular London means that the design is one of realism and can easily be related to our own world. However, we see that there are certainly differences with the fact that they have precautions in place of a dragon attack. The world itself also feels alive, like there is actually people living in it, as you see shops, radio stations and park benches breathing life into what otherwise might just be a bland empty city that doesn't appear to be lived in from the outside. Well, that is the first strength of the series out of the way. So now we can move on to the second strength that I wish to talk about in this video. That strength being the world building, considering that we have only had 4 chapters of the series plus the one-shot which you might consider to be chapter 0. We have had a surprising amount of information about this new world thrown right at our faces. However, despite this, I do not feel like it is overwhelming and hard to keep track of. Certainly, there are specifics which do not remember, but the main parts which are key to the story are things which are written in such a way as to be easily absorbed by the reader. One thing that Kubo has done a good job of so far is making it so that the dragons really feel like they are part of this world that he is creating. In other series where fantastical beasts exist alongside humans, even magical humans, there seem to be extraordinarily little difference in the way humans have developed, how technologies have been adapted, or people act in general. In Burn the Witch, the dragons are not separate from the development of humans but are intertwined with it. Dragons are raised and have their special abilities utilized for people's benefits, be they mundane such as boosting of radio signals or growing plants, up to the more fantastical such as flying vehicles for witches and wizards. The people of reverse London know and understand the dangers that come from being near a dragon and are understandable afraid of not only them but Wingbind. This shows an attention to realism which isn't seen in a lot of series where civilians don't concern themselves with the monsters beyond their gaze. Here the idea of even coming into contact with one of these things has everyone scared. Then there is the existence of Wingbind, the fact that an entire organization has formed to deal with and regulate these dragons speaks to a natural part of the world, as in our world there are organizations which are supposed to deal with and protect both humans and animals from one another in extreme cases. Another aspect to the world building is the fact of how reverse London functions with front London, acting as a sort of mirror to each other. When a building in reverse London is destroyed, the building in front London is destroyed, and presumable the reverse is also true. This speaks to an interesting connection between the two locations which in the future has the potential to cause conflict between reverse London and front London, as if more of these legendary dragons show up and wreak havoc then it is certainly going to be troublesome for front London. This goes further in that items which are created in either of the two places have the potential of also being that opposite sides version of that item, such as the newspaper which was somehow both the front London news and the reverse London news at the same time, requiring some sort of magic to reveal the reverse side. The fact that distinct sections of Wingbind exist to do specific jobs is another part which makes the entire organization seem realistic, as in the case of big organizations there is usually several sections to it which are responsible for different areas of work. The fact that the organization is ran like a business where people work means that by all rights it needs a way to support and incentive their staff to do the best they can. The fact that Wingbind has an entire division for accounting speaks to a realistic understanding of how one of these industries would run. Continuing down the rabbit hole of the separate divisions, the fact that the members of each group seem to have a different mean of casting spells is curious and makes me wonder if Kubo is going to keep with the idea that each sect has their own separate tools, such as the inks using welding or paint and the pipers using pipes. As we have only had a small number of chapters in this series thus far, there isn't an extensive amount of world building to go into without working on the principle of theory crafting, which I'd rather keep to the potentials section of this analysis. If Kubo can keep up with this level of world building, then he certainly should not have any issues with keeping people invested in the series, provided that the world building is consistent and as imaginative as this. Moving onwards to the next strength I would like to talk about is the intrigue which Kubo has managed to put into this series thus far. For me, other than the character dynamics, what really keeps me invested in a story is the unanswered questions, the hooks which keep dragging me back in and keeping me wondering what is going to happen next. That is where this series has managed to do exceedingly well in the small number of chapters that it has been running. First, we have the hook of Balgo's execution being on the horizon and the danger which him being a dragon-clad possessed to the normal people living in reverse London. While this hook is resolved for the moment, I can easily see it coming up again later, considering that nothing has really changed in the circumstances surrounding him. He is useful for the moment, but the moment he is no longer of use to them, I can see the top of the horns sanctioning his death again without batting an eyelash. This is a hook which I can see coming up time and time again if the series is to go on and become a long-running series, especially if people aren't happy with having their lives endangered because he is living in reverse London. The next major hook was the Marchion's reveal as being these supremely powerful dragons which even ahead of one of Wingbind's sects had trouble dealing with. Each one apparently being unique in their own way, not to mention that they are the progenitors of the dark dragons, which brings up the question of how these dark dragons are really created if they have progenitors, but that is just the sort of mystery which keeps my mind spinning with all kinds of ideas. What could these other Marchions look like? What sort of abilities will they have? Are they evil like the dark dragons, or is there something more to them? Who knows? But I certainly would like to see for myself. Balgo's sword, for lack of a better term, would be the third hook which draws me in. Considering that no one else in the series has been shown to use a physical weapon, rather using magic either to summon something or cause some sort of effect, the fact that he was able to form a sword from the pipe he was holding makes me curious. Considering neither Noel, Ninny or Balgo himself knew what exactly was going on, it can be assumed that this isn't just something to do with him being dragon-clad. Although that's a possibility, seeing as those who come into contact with dragons are supposed to be executed, so knowledge on them might be limited. But seeing as how Kubo is basing a lot of the story on fairy tales and myths, it is possible he is drawing on stories of magical swords like Caliburn, Excalibur, Joaouz and others. The fourth hook is the mysterious individual in charge of research and development, Saka Rin. We know nothing about this person or why they weren't at the meeting, but that in of itself allows our minds to run wild with ideas of who they are and what they are about. The final hook is Billy Banks Jr. himself. This fellow straight up one-shot a legendary dragon from miles away without anyone being any the wiser. He does it with such casual ease while Bruno, Noel and Ninny were being pushed onto the ropes against Cinderella. Then there is the remark from Sullivan saying that she was glad to not have underestimated the son of a hero. Who is this hero? And if Billy has this kind of power up his sleeve, was he just kicked out of Sabers because he was lazy, or is there more going on there? Hard to even make a guess at this point with how little information we have on him, but he gives off the vibe of a sort of standoffish mentor character, someone who is in the character's corner but doesn't get involved directly unless the characters are about to get themselves offed. I can't wait to see if Ninny and Noel end up finding out how strong he is, or if it's going to be a running gag throughout the series that they keep mocking and underestimating him when he keeps having to save their backsides. The issues some stories have is the result of the characters not having a relevant goal, resulting in the characters either meandering and just falling into the plot, or the plot twists round on itself to get the characters involved when they shouldn't have any direct involvement in what is going on in the main plot. That is not the case in this story, as Kubo has given the plot a key goal for our main characters to work towards, and that is the elimination of the margin. Before this we had the short-term goal of making certain Balgo does not get himself killed or cause anyone else to get killed by the way he looks after Osuchi. This was something that kept our two main characters occupied and gave them a reason to get involved in the later plot developments, and in turn gave chances for exploration of their characters, which in this case was their motivation behind protecting him. And as for the main goal, the fact that our two main characters are part of an organization which is directly opposed to these creatures brings them into the plot without their requiring the plot to bend to their will or have a deus ex machina forcefully drag them into the plot, like in the case of certain series where the plot becomes contrived in order to keep getting their main characters involved with it. As the major goal appears to be simple, it gives a large amount of room for Kubo to adjust it later on and alter or redirect what he is going for without breaking any of the world building he has done up to that point, or making it unbelievable that the direction of the plot would change in such a way. The generic starting point allows for an almost limitless amount of options in the direction he might take this story from this point onwards. The fact that the goal exists not only as something for our two main characters but as a major point to the plot and the world building at large means that they can all be tied in together as the plot develops, goals get reached, and in turn the world gets built up with the information we have on these dragons getting expanded each time. And to keep the plot grounded and help give us something to relate to, the characters both Noel and Ninny have relatable personal goals which the plot likely won't focus extensively on but help to inform their characters, with Noel being mainly concerned with the monetary wealth which comes from her job, whereas Ninny is mostly interested in the recognition and achievements which don't directly translate into monetary rewards but rather a sense of pride and a position she desires. Ninny's goal is more relevant to the current plot compared to Noel, which has the potential of bringing her more to the forefront of the plot, with her goal still being joining the Sabers unit, which are certainly going to play a major role in the capture and defeat of the Martians, and it could turn around so that Ninny goes off to try and attack the dragons so as to get enough recognition to join Sabers. Whichever direction the plot goes in, we know at least for the moment what the end goal of the series is. The final strength I'd like to talk about in this video is likability and relatability of our main cast of characters. Between Noel and Ninny we have a mix of a cool-headed deadpan character with a softer, more teasing side underneath, and on the other side we have a hot-headed, loud character who is willing to bend the laws for the sake of the people that she cares about. The constant back and forth between them over how they should refer to one another, Ninny attempting to act as Noel's senior and Noel's deadpanned comeback, results in the pair being quite enjoyable to see together. As of right now we don't know too much about their characters or backstories, but we get a general gist of who they are from their introductions. Noel saying that she likes uniforms because she doesn't want to have to tell people who she is, and Ninny commenting about how she dislikes fairy tales and thinks they are full of it. Considering their age and this only being hopefully a very small portion of the overall story, they have plenty of time to grow and develop as people and as members of Wingbind. Bruno is a hothead who tries to act cool but can be easily annoyed by people insulting how he looks or not taking his offers seriously or taking his offers for granted or not giving his sect of Wingbind the respect he believes they deserve. But despite this, he isn't an idiot who lets his anger get in the way of what needs to be done and is able to see the bigger picture, as when he requested that Balgo have his designation for elimination be rescinded so that they could put him to use in trying to locate the other Marchens, as he could be of use to them more alive than dead. He is also smart enough and devious enough to set up the attack on the newspaper building so he could frame Balgo for the incident to get him killed. He is also rather comedic in his own aggressive ways, which make him fun to see in action, not to mention he have a personality which works to bring out more snark out of our two main girls. Balgo is a comedic character which is likable in that he causes Noel and Ninny to be put into positions which gives them the chance to show off their own characters, and he is also just a nice if perverted guy. The main issue with his character as it is right now is that he comes off a bit bland and a bit too much of an unflappable individual given what he has gone through thus far in the story. Billy is the final character who has had enough exposure for me to get some grasp of his personality and to grow to like his character. He is a mentor character without being a mentor, an ally who stands in the background until the main cast needs saving, a relaxed person who does not like to go all out unless they have to. He also gives off the impression of someone who knows more than they let on and are actively doing stuff in the background which the main cast isn't aware of right now and will come back around to be a key point in the future. The other characters haven't had enough exposure to start to develop any sort of attachment to them, but from the small things we got from each of them, there isn't any character which comes off as unbearable, annoying, or the sort to derail the plot with their actions. Introducing so many characters in such a short amount of time and not one of them being a flop is quite impressive when considering the chances of there being at least one character which comes off as unlikable for all the wrong reasons which can put people off a series. Now that we have the good out of the way, let us have a look at the bad, because as we all know there is nothing which is perfect, but by acknowledging these faults we can become more accepting of criticism and expand on what we do like about it as a counter-argument. Due to the fact the series is so short and a lot of weaknesses are just the result of the series not having enough time to correct them, so this section is going to be shorter than the strengths, and those weaknesses which are the result of a lack of chapters are going into the threats section instead. The first weakness I would like to cover is Balgo's current characterization. He comes off as a less reactive version of Ichigo, which is saying a bit considering that Ichigo was a very reactive character in his own right, but Balgo, unlike Ichigo, when pulled into a situation would actually seek to resolve it or do something about it. Balgo just accepts it and goes along with it. He doesn't show any signs of contempt for being forced to move to reverse London, not the level of fear one might expect from someone having their life threatened, or even the level of sadness one might expect after watching his friend die. His emotions just seem to be stuck on constantly happy or minor sadness. This can easily be rectified in later chapters, but for now it's an issue that prevents me from fully enjoying his character. The next weakness I see in this series is the lack of emotion behind the fights we have had so far. In the first chapter, Noel and Ninny have the fight with the Dark Dragon, who was pretending to be Balgo's friend, but the two have no connection with it and the creature doesn't have any sort of emotional connection to them either. The fight with Bruno and then Cinderella are much the same. There is no sort of build-up to the antagonists for us to come to understand them as people, so when they fight with our main cast there isn't that emotional weight behind what's going on. It does not help that when there is the chance for him to put in emotional moments such as with the Dark Dragon and Balgo, Kubo instead goes for a dark comedy moment. In the case of some people, they won't mind that there isn't any sort of emotional build-up to what is going on between the two sides, but for me personally, I enjoy when we have at least a little bit of an understanding of why the enemies are doing what they are doing. The fact that one of what is most likely to be the main antagonists of the series was offed without any significant build-up to their character, and the fact that their characterization was almost non-existent. If this continues, it could be a much bigger problem for the series overall, but we have seen prior to this that Kubo can make his antagonists, if not compelling, at least interest in their mindsets and their goals. Considering that we have at least 6 more potentially completely independent antagonists to go over, we have a lot of room for characterization for them as long as the series doesn't end up getting rushed. The next weakness I would like to refer to is the fact that this story for the time being is limited to Reverse London. While having a relative small space can lead to concise world building, it also limits the extent of the world that can be built. When compared to the Soul Society, which was an entire world and so was Waco Mundo, Reverse London is considerably smaller. The idea that all these legendary dragons can be found within this small space seems laughable, and even more so when considering the devastation they have the potential to cause, which is reflected in Front London. This can result in Kubo being forced to limit himself in terms of battles so as to not cause issues with what happens to Front London, unless the end goal of this series is to see Reverse London destroyed and the dragons released into the ordinary London. But that does not seem to be the case for the time being. So for now, Reverse London being a very limited space is a weakness due to the fact of the limits it puts on Kubo, both in terms of his fights and the world building he can do. As Reverse London is supposed to be a complete replica of Front London, there isn't going to be much difference between the two except for the fact that dragons are used within the area. The next weakness I'd like to talk about is the fact that a lot of characters have been introduced at once and we haven't had a chance to focus on many of them, as they are all trying to share the screen time. This weakness is only relevant for the time being as the size of the series is limited, but as the series grows it is likely this weakness will disappear. However, for the moment Kubo has introduced almost all the top of the horns and none of them have been given the chance to fully integrate with the plot. Not only that, during their introduction some of the characters did not even speak, so for the moment they have no characterization beyond their appearances. The other issue with introducing so many characters at once so near the beginning of the series is it can take away time from our main cast to develop these secondary characters, when characterizing the main cast should be of the highest importance right near the beginning of a series. Otherwise it can lead to characters becoming stationary and unchanging despite the plot moving forwards, or having them change without any impetus for change being shown to the reader. The final weakness I would like to refer to is the generic idea of the plot when you get down to the base elements. It appears to be a simple good against evil plot, with our protagonists being set up to go against these monsters who from the look of it either aren't able or willing to converse with them, making them little more than wild beasts that need to be put down. This feels like a dressed-up child's fairy tale at this point. And if that's what Kubo is going for, that's fine, but it does limit the potential of what can happen in the story later on down the line. The other issue with a generic plot is that it is possible to determine what the outcome of a plot point is going to be. We all know that the protagonists are going to win. This is a shonen series after all, but at the same time how they get that win is what is important. In the case of Burn the Witch, in the end, with the way Kubo has set it up, the only way for any of Dragon plot points to be resolved is with their destruction or imprisonment. There isn't any room for alternative methods with these monsters. We saw in the case of Cinderella that despite spending time with Macy, she was still willing to go out and attack the area she was in without concern for her safety. And as Nini said, no matter how much you love them, you just can't reach someone, you can't get through to, implying that no matter what sort of relationship a dragon might form with a human, once it becomes a dark dragon, or in this case a March, it doesn't matter, they will attack you without hesitation. This is not me saying that the entire series must be generic or predictable, only that this basic framework for the major plot points as it stands isn't suited to significant twists and turns. The story outside of the main plot still has a vast amount of room to distinguish itself from other series in its genre. That is all the negatives out of the way. I kept it as short as possible, seeing as no one really likes to talk about the negatives of a series they like. However, I felt it was important to recognize them as being part of what the series is. Now, however, I'd like to pause with the analysis for a second and ask you to please comment down below one strength and one weakness you think Burn the Witch has. It can be one I've already covered or something I overlooked. Feel free to write in as much detail as you like. I will take great pleasure in reading your thoughts on the series. Now onto the opportunities, and Burn the Witch has a lot of them, but to keep the video to a manageable length I decided to limit it to 5 like all the others. Opportunities are things which Burn the Witch has potential to do well, or things which Burn the Witch has which have the potential to make it a great series. The first opportunity that Burn the Witch has is its connection to Bleach, Kubo's previous work. Having this connection to Bleach means that it has the potential for drawing on that series' world building, its characters and plot threads, which can be easily transferred over to Burn the Witch. While direct interaction between characters is not required, things that are offhandedly mentioned can result in plot points from Bleach coming into Burn the Witch, or plot threads which were never fully fleshed out in Bleach getting more attention in the Burn the Witch series, such as Komomura's bestial form or Yoruichi's cat form, both of which went unexplained in Bleach for the most part. There are certainly people out there who would be happy to see some of their favorite characters appear in Burn the Witch, if not as active parts of the plot then as cameos, and Bleach has a vast amount of untapped potential for world building, and Burn the Witch is thus far as a canvas that has only just begun to have the outlines of the world filled into it. If the two were to be melded together well, then Burn the Witch gains access to 3 additional worlds of which it can have its characters interacting with. The Soul Society, Waco Mundo and Hell, 2 of the 3 which have already been extensively expanded upon in Bleach, but even then there are still more chances for developing these points. Not to mention the fact that as far as we know the people of Reverse London are not souls and are very much alive. Considering that the Eastern branch of the Soul Society was very much against giving powers to the living and letting the living get involved with their business, the fact that the Western branch has no issue with this, even making it a job for teens, has the potential of causing some culture clash if members of the GOTY 13 are brought over into Burn the Witch. There is also the chance for us to get a deeper understanding of the magic used by the Western and Eastern branches by comparing them, and by having an explanation from a character in series or even a text box just telling us about the magic would be immensely helpful in coming to understand something which went mostly underdeveloped in Bleach, and that being the Kido spells. Since the Western branch seems to rely strictly on magic to do the fighting for them, we can possibly see some really inventive uses of their spells and learn why when compared to the Shinigami they use a lot more tools to help with their magic. But the fact of the matter is, unless Kubo is either retconning the fact that Wingbind is part of the Western branch of the Soul Society, excluding any sort of connection with Bleach will come off as wasteful and leave a lot of questions unanswered for the Bleach fans, as well as gaps in the world building of this new series. Questions such as, why aren't there any hollows in Reverse London? What happens if a dragon comes in contact with a hollow? These questions are things which can all be explored if Kubo feels the desire to expand both universes dramatically. There is countless other things Kubo can make happen if he really plays into this connection, but if they were covered in vast detail then this video could end up being hours long discussing every little thing which could happen as a result, and that is the stuff for individual theory videos which will be coming up later. So for now we'll move right along into the next opportunity which which has. That being the character growth potential for the main characters, but more so for the secondary characters like the Top of the Horns. When compared to the GOTY 13, its captains have been around for hundreds of years, but if all the people in the Reverse London live a regular human lifespan, then the oldest people in Reverse London are likely to be only 100 years old. This means that those characters we see are much more likely to be in tune with the changes that are happening in the world. They are aware of how things are changing and are not stuck in the past, unlike the Eastern Branch. This means that whereas the captains and lieutenants are more or less set in their ways for a lot of the series due to their hundreds of years of life, the Top of the Horns are more willing to change themselves. Being born in the modern era where changes are happening all the time and at a rapid rate, these characters must be far more willing to adapt if they are to keep in touch not only with the outside world but their subordinates. Having a leadership which is willing to change and listen to the younger generations is something which can result in significant character growth on the side of the leaders and the subordinates. This opportunity really revolves around the idea of Kubo showing that not only his main characters but even the side characters are still moving along on their journey and changing every passing day rather than being just stationary monuments to a past age. Character development is one of the things which keeps a show feeling fresh and keeps it from going stale without the constant need of high-octane action or leaping immediately from one plot point to another. Character development is that thing which can happen between the major story beats or transition to being a main story beat. If that character development is on the part of a side character, it can influence the entire plot from there on out without the main characters even getting directly involved, and can lead to much more interesting stories. Too often in fiction, the characters in power are elderly individuals too stuck in their ways to go through any sort of development, or only get development when they are about to die, thus cutting off any sort of payoff from that growth in character directly, having to instead be used to affect those around them, which isn't a bad thing but it's not a great thing either. But enough with a personal bias against the death of characters being used for others' characters' growth, and on to another opportunity that the series has, and that is the fact that it has a very conceptually interesting power system at play here. In Bleach we had Kido, spells which could be used by the Shinigami in order to attack, defend, restrain or communicate with others, but it went ignored for a large part of the series, instead focusing in on the Zanpakuto. This resulted in the magic being highly underdeveloped and being pretty much being a complete unknown in terms of mechanics and how one actually develops and masters Aikido. In the case of Burn the Witch, however, the members of Wingbind do not have Zanpakuto. They don't have anything but magic to rely on in order to fight outside of their own personal dragon mounts, except maybe in the case of Balgo. This means that if Kubo wants to expand on the power system of Burn the Witch, he is going to have far less elements to juggle and spread out time between, so he can focus on making the magic as complex or as simple as he wants it to be. The fact that he is already starting to do this with how he shows Nini and Noel using their pipes and Bruno using his spray cans to cast more powerful spells is a good sign for future developments in this area. Even more so with the fact that neither Nini nor Noel were aware of exactly what Balgo was doing, which could see them doing research, which would be a natural way for Kubo to expand on the workings on the magic without having to go with the tired trope of the antagonist or protagonist explaining everything during a fight. With the groundwork already set with what looks to be different kinds of spells such as summoning, attacking, and supplementary, Along with a mixture of tools which have varying effects and uses in the spellcasting, it looks like Kubo is really planning on making something of this which is a bit less style over substance than his previous magic system. And just as a personal bias, I find magic systems to be one of the key points in a series which keeps me invested and keeps me coming back for more. It's part of the reason I wasn't a huge fan of Harry Potter by the end, because we didn't really know anything about how the magic worked by the end of the series, and it basically became guns in the shape of wands which shoot out different colored lights. The next opportunity that the series has is the idea of reimagined fairy tales. Each of the Marchen is based upon a familiar fairy tale which exists in our own world, something which we might have heard when we were growing up from our parents or teachers. This fact means that we can already start to formulate idea on what the other Marchens might look like or what their abilities might be, but that is for a theory video that I am already working on. No, what I want to talk about is how Kubo is going to turn these wistful, woeful and familiar stories into manifestations of terrifying monster which is going to leave us surprised but also capable of immediately recognizing them as being the fairy tale they are supposed to represent. The possible ways he could interpret stories like Little Red Riding Hood are many, and each one has its own benefits and drawbacks. That's without even getting into the fact that some of these stories have different variations when you look to different areas of the world. We could see mixtures of different local version of tales to create monsters which rival anything we have seen in Bleach. We can see Kubo playing with concepts which he barely scratched the surface of in his previous series, things which make our imaginations run wild and take us back to those fairy tales with an entirely new sense of appreciation and thoughts on them. Already the image of a vengeful Cinderella using the power of the fairy godmother not to go to the ball to meet the prince but to take revenge on her cruel relatives, becoming a monster in the process. A monster like the dragon we see in Burn the Witch, comes to mind. Let's also not forget that at this point in time we have almost unlimited potential for cool superpowers from each of the Marchen, and in turn can have cool fights with our protagonists, forcing them to use strategy to face off against them, something which was sorely lacking in his prior work due to everyone always explaining how their abilities work. Keeping on with the idea of limitless potential of the Marchen, on the other side of the coin this means that Kubo has almost a limitless number of ways for our protagonist to take them out, things which play into their tales hopefully, like maybe a giant wolf summon for Red Riding Hood. Whatever he decides to do with these tales, there is certainly going to be a large variety between each of the Marchen. With no generic form or powers connecting them, they can each be utterly unique, a trait which will certainly play a role in keeping the series from becoming stale as a result of repetitive battles where the protagonists only do the same thing over and over again to defeat the enemy. There is after all only so many times you can hear Getsuga Tensho before it gets repetitive, don't you think? The final opportunity I want to talk about is the possibility of a greater mystery going on behind the scenes. Who is the hero that Sullivan was talking about? Why is Billy so powerful he can take out a Marchen from a considerable distance with no issue, while Bruno, a leader of one of Wingbind's sects, was having trouble and was ready to call in assistance from Ninny and Noel? What is with the sword that Balgo was able to make appear from the pipe? Who is Sakharin? These questions are things which have the potential of causing the story to fly off the rails and completely break away from the generic premise and become something much deeper and more fleshed out. The fact that Kubo is setting up these little nuggets of intrigue speaks well of the fact that he has something waiting in the wings for these characters. These nuggets may not pay off for some time, or they might be quickly resolved only to reveal more nuggets of information which in turn help to flesh out the world and the mysteries within it. I'm not expecting Kubo to go and suddenly start with the same level of world building and mystery as Oda, who has been keeping us waiting for what must be decades for answers to the puzzles he put out there right at the beginning of One Piece, but having some intrigue never hurt, and it is guaranteed to keep people coming back for more, provided that any payoffs for them don't turn out to either be a completely let down or get retconned at a later date. If things play out right and Kubo keeps giving us enough information to sink our teeth into while also drizzling in these questions from time to time, this could end up being a very long and successful series for him should he desire for it to go on to be so. But it's all down to his desires for the series, his health, and if Shonen Jump wants to keep the series going or not. After all, it's a cutthroat market out there for a mangaka, with series getting axed and picked up all the time. With that being said, I'm done talking about the opportunities. It was short, but I didn't want to get too much into theorizing territory or get my hopes up as much as anyone else for things which may never actually happen. But as a final statement on it, Burn the Witch has as many opportunities as Kubo is willing to imagine, and as many as Shonen Jump are willing to let us see. Now moving on to the final section of the video, the threats to the series itself. But before that, I'd like to thank you for making it this far and listening to what I have had to say so far. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Now, on with the analysis. The first threat is the same as the first opportunity which I spoke about, that being the connection to Bleach itself. The fact of the matter is, as much good as it could do for the series, it could also do just as much if not more damage to it. With elements of Bleach being forced into the series, elements which undermine the elements which are unique to Burn the Witch. For instance, if the Shinigami suddenly came to Reverse London and started killing the dragons with their Zanpakuto, it would ruin what makes the setting of Reverse London unique, in that we have these monsters living alongside people. The same goes if the Marchins partway through the series were replaced with Vastolord Hollows which started firing Ceros at our protagonists. This would seriously undermine the world building and the importance of Wingbind's actions in taking care of these powerful dragons. That is only the side of messing with the plot and world building. In the case of characters, if suddenly Ichigo showed up in Reverse London, the series would undoubtedly be moved away from focusing on Nini and Noel, as Ichigo is an immensely more powerful character and would be dragged into the conflict with the Marchins if he liked it or not. And if a fan-favorite character like Kenpachi or Urahara was to show up, then Kubo would end up having to focus on them to not upset the fans of Bleach by having their favorite characters getting shoved to the side for these characters they have yet to fall in love with. Not to mention characters who have already gone through their development might make the characters of Burn the Witch seem unjustifiable plain in comparison, as they have not yet had time to develop themselves. So for the sake of keeping Burn the Witch from being completely overwhelmed and just becoming a spin-off of Bleach, I hope that Kubo doesn't bend the knee to those insisting that he has to have characters from Bleach or excessive elements from it added into the series. A sprinkling is fine, but don't go and make it so that the series can't exist on its own 2 feet. If it comes to it, I'd rather not have any major connections to Bleach than have Burn the Witch be dragged down because of those connections. I want to be able to say I love Bleach and Burn the Witch, not that I love Bleach and it is spin-off, Bleaching London. But enough of that whole debate, which is honestly a lot more subjective on the side of the reader as to if they think adding more Bleach into it is good or not, and on with the next threat the series faces. And that is something which pertains to Kubo himself, or more factually it pertains to his writing style. What made the Soul Society arc stand out from all the other arcs in Bleach was the fact that out of all the other arcs it was the one where the villains got the most exposure and exploration. We got to see Byakuya struggle with his duty to the Soul Society when it conflicted with the duty he felt to his deceased wife. We got to see that the enemy were not just that, but were in fact living, or not as the case was, breathing people with their own goals, ambitions, wants and desires. We could feel the emotional weight of each of these battles because we understood the antagonists on a deeper level than any of our protagonists at the time did, because we got to see a glimpse into their life. After that arc, however, we never saw that sort of dedication to humanizing the antagonists again from Kubo. We never got to really come to understand the antagonists on an emotional level which had us invested in them. Sure, some of them were cool and some of them were silly and annoying, but we didn't like them because they were well developed and had interesting philosophies which we could relate and empathize with. No, we liked them because they ran on the rule of cool a lot of the time or had hints of underlining characterization which never got to play out due to the way the story treated them or the way that the time in the spotlight was divided up between them all. In the case of Burn the Witch, we have already introduced the Top of the Horn, what can be considered to be a similar group to the Captains of Bleach, a selection of side characters in Billy, Macy and Balgo, as well as having one of the main antagonists introduced and eliminated in the space of a single chapter, all without us even getting time to fully get to know who our main protagonists are as people or grow to appreciate these new characters which keep getting introduced. In fact, in the Top of the Horn's meeting, one person is missing and several of them don't talk at all, giving us nothing but their appearance to go off. So far there has only been 4 chapters plus the one-shot, so this can easily change, and I hope it does, because when Kubo takes the time to flesh out his characters he makes some really interesting characters. But the fact that we have seen time and time again that Kubo has left characters out to dry, even popular or important characters like Stark, like Yami or any of the other Espada who weren't named Ulquiorra. In fact, not even mentioning the antagonists, we have seen him leave what at the beginning of the series were main characters out to dry. Chad, who had apparently been with Ichigo for ages, got less development than a lot of side characters which didn't have any connection to Ichigo at all. All that this points to is that there is a high chance we might see some of these characters getting woefully underdeveloped throughout the series. Moving on, the next threat has nothing to do with Kubo as an author or mangaka, but more to do with his health and the whims of Shonen Jump. That being the series' short run time, we have no idea how long this second season of Burn the Witch is going to be, or if it might end up being an ongoing series similar to Bleach or becoming a monthly series. It's hard to say, but the thing is, if the series ends up being incredibly short, then this is going to limit what Kubo is able to do with it. It's going to limit the amount of characters he can put in, the amount of time each character gets in the limelight, and the amount of cool fight scenes we are going to get to see. If Shonen Jump decides to pull the plug, so to speak, or Kubo's health deteriorates, then we could be left with a very sour ending, one which is far too reminiscent to the ending of Bleach, where we ended up getting what appeared to be a rushed ending with many of the major plot points the series seemed to be building up to, and the climactic battle which should have ended the series just getting cut in order to end the series as soon as possible. Characters were wasted, settings were wasted, and questions went unanswered for a large portion of the fandom, and even those who read the Can't Fear Your Own World light novel were left with several questions that haven't yet to be answered. A series left unfinished can sometimes be worse than a series never started in the first place, because it leaves the reader with those unanswered questions which they know are never going to end up being answered because of the way that the series was cut short and left on a note which leaves a sour taste in their mouth. But continuing on from outright cancellation or being put on hold, we have the threat of the plot being too generic and thus not catching the audience's attention. I already mentioned in the previous section about how it has a weakness, and that weakness was the fact that the plot seems generic, and if this continues to be the case, then we may see the drop in popularity until, if a series comes off as something everyone has seen before, or as not being eye-catching enough in terms of where the story is going, then the series has a chance of failing because no one wants to read or watch it. Burn the Witch. Continuing down the path of generic plot can result in some people who would have otherwise read it for the characters getting turned off and seeking out different media to consume for their entertainment. People can be fickle and are quickly to change their minds, even if they initially enjoy the plot. If it continues to meander and not progress in a way that they find appealing, then they will jump ship without a second thought in a lot of cases. Being generic in this case is one of the worst things a series can be, because even if it has amazing characters or interesting power systems, it might not be enough to hook an audience which has seen the plot beats 1,000 times before. Such is the threat which Burn the Witch is under at its current time. And the final threat to consider is one which a lot of series, long and short, must worry about, but more in the case of long-running ones. That is a lack of character development. This is certainly true when it comes to series which have a plot which isn't the most original and where other elements have yet to come into play to grab the attention of the audience. This is more true when a character's initial concept doesn't vibe with a large portion of the audience, and where character development is required to make them tolerable or even enjoyable for this portion of the fan base. We have already begun to see an issue with lack of character development in the case of Balgo, who, despite what he has gone through in a relatively short amount of time, he hasn't changed at all as a person, and he hasn't begun to show any signs of being a different person from the one who was introduced in the one-shot. And in Bleach we already know that character development was not one of his strong suits, and that could end up being transferred over to this series, something which could really impact on the longevity of the series. All these threats are just things which are based on prior works Kubo has done, or things which have a possibility of happening based on what has been presented to us thus far. That being said, this is no guarantee that any of them will come to pass or ever become a major issue, but being aware of them allows us to expect the worst and appreciate the best of what is to come from this series. Now that is the end of my SWOT analysis. I hope I didn't bore you all to death with my rambling and maybe made you think about it in a way which is different from how you perceived the series before, or maybe I just reinforced your own thoughts, or maybe you think I'm completely wrong and should just shut up. Whichever it is, I'm happy to have you come this far with me to hear this. I have been the Anonymous Weeb, and remember to follow and believe in the Commander Zen and embrace your weebdom.